everyone. Exact Ventures has been around a while. We're in our ninth year, and we've been quantifying and forecasting the signaling markets for most of that time. And there's been a lot of change within signaling. So things like new technologies like diameter, and with 5G networks, there's a new signaling protocol. There is, a lot of new technologies underpinning the networks, like virtualization and cloud. A lot of the security issues are relatively new, and that's been something new. Also, changes with vendors. So a number of very significant, prominent vendors in this space have exited, and that's left a lot of customers searching for replacement vendors in this space. What hasn't really changed in the market is the need for SS7 STP capacity. And we underwent a project to sort of measure what exactly the size of that installed base was, and what sort of the market opportunity was going forward. And in 2018, we estimate that there were about 248 million MSU, so messaging signaling units, existing in the networks. And you could see the slide in front of you. And we have that, declining slowly over the next few years, just due to, some retirements and some of the traffic shifting over to 4G and to eventually 5G. But again, we're not measuring like a large shift away from capacity. And I'll go over some of the subscriber figures coming up. And then to value that installed base. So if you apply the current market price to the current sort of capacity that's out there, there is about $2.4 billion worth of SS7 STPs at the current market prices. And even 5 years from now, that'll still be a fairly sizable market at about $1.5 billion at the 2023 market prices. So again, still very important market. The next slide shows some of these voice subscription forecasts, and why STPs are still very much an important part of operator networks, despite all the 4G and now the 5G hype. In 2018, less than 20% of subscribers were on VoLTE, voice over LTE, which, as everyone knows since you're on the webinar, uses diameter signaling primarily. So even 5 years from now, given a lot of the projections out there, most subscribers will still be relying on 2G, 3G voice networks. In many parts of the world, VoLTE still relatively new. There are a lot of still coverage issues in a lot of parts of the world that make it hard for operators to support VoLTE, and handsets are still an issue as well. So taking a look regionally, at the end of 2018, North America accounted for about 26% of the MSU installed base. And since North America is one of the regions where there's a pretty high VoLTE penetration, we have that declining over time, as you can see on the chart. EMEA has a relatively low penetration, so that's certainly growing in stature as that base continues to be really important in supporting all the voice traffic. And same with Asia Pacific and Latin America. So certainly the growth in those regions is supported by the very low end of the market that use inexpensive low-end devices that really employ the older 2G and 3G voice networks. And then the next slide is just to sum up, or to sort of revisit these vendor exits that I mentioned previously. A number of them, Cisco exited a while ago, and there's still some Cisco IP STPs in the market that need to be looked at, and even Siemens has some older ones, despite all the acquisitions that have happened to the Siemens and networking group. And then security and privacy remain really critical operational and marketing activities for network operators. So it's vital that any security issues are proactively looked at, and legacy systems often aren't well positioned to address sort of the latest attacks and to respond really quickly to those latest attacks. And then lastly, certainly everything from a standards perspective is pointing toward cloud infrastructure for 5G, and signaling is certainly one of them. And as operators go and look to make long-term architectural choices, having a flexible cloud infrastructure is really important to that. And to the extent that they can put some of their legacy services like SS7, STPs, and other types of signaling functions onto their cloud, the more that they can save from a CapEx and an OpEx perspective going forward. So again, that's really critical. So just in sum, there's a large and pretty stable installed base of STPs that increasingly need replacement. I talked about security, and that's a really important factor as well. And then lastly, when looking at architectural choices, there's really only one choice if you want to continue to have a modern infrastructure that's flexible, and that's going to the cloud. And with that, and before I turn it over to Matt at Nut Number, we have a poll. So let's shift and talk about the poll. Poll question number 1. And I will read it for you, and you can think about it for a second. What are your plans to modernize or replace your SS7 STPs? First, are you actively planning to do that? Are you looking at investing over the next, say, 6 to 12 months? Or are you actively looking, is perhaps your time frame over the next sort of 12 to 24 months? Are you looking maybe beyond that, beyond 24 months? Or have you recently modernized it? Maybe you've recently gone through that process. And then lastly, do you have sort of no current plans? So that's the poll, and maybe we can see if there are some responses real quick before Matt takes over. And it looks like there are no current plans is the current number 1. I'm not sure how many folks voted here, but that's certainly pretty interesting. And then one person probably is actively planning at 17%, and some are actively considering. Well, so hopefully those with no current plans will have a look at the webinar and realize that maybe it's now a good time to look at it, because there are a lot of things coming down the pike or that have been brewing for a while that might support an investment in modernizing the SS7. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt at Net Number. So thank you all very much.